I agree. So it's just concern, and we can circle back around and have this conversation again, because I think this is crossing over next week because this is a money bill. But I think the it's just concerning me that these are both recommendations from, a board that hasn't been appointed yet, 3 folks that are going to come back with these recommendations. And then the other thing is one is they're just going to consider it.
I see that.
And then the last point I'll make is it goes beyond this. It's about the conclusion that has been made that the only option that's going to be available for these folks who are in these communities are loans. And loans are just problematic. Okay, well, maybe I misunderstood that.
I said loans and grants. I said loans and grants.
Okay, well, just scratch that then, and I'll just be done. Thanks.
But I think you're right. I think we can reword a little bit to make it clearer that they have to come back to us, not considering reduced, but how to implement a program for reduced or eliminated licensing fees.
And there's some definition challenges there too, because we tried to provide definitions and we kind of got slammed for that. But there's this use of disproportionately impacted in both of those paragraphs. Nobody defines that anywhere in this policy.
That is true. But I don't. I think that's what we're asking the advisory committee to come back with some definitions for that. That was my understanding.
And not to belabor the point, but the challenge, I understand that we're asking for the ACCD and others to come back with definitions for that. But we're at the same time, we're using it in this policy to establish a criteria for some folks to come back and provide us a report on something. So, I mean, I don't want to create a quagmire or anything like that, but it's just that, maybe we should define to the best of our ability. If we're going to use that in this policy, maybe we should define it or use something else. And I think it doesn't hurt to say that my largest underlying concern with it is just the fact that we would need to wait for the CCB to come back to actually advise us on these matters, because it seems like they would be, seems like there should be a way we can get after that before that point. But I've taken enough time. Thank you for that. And I would ask you to take it into consideration and please allow me to circle back around with you here or judiciary so we can close the loop on it.
Yeah, we definitely will. And we'll probably do this again on Thursday.
Yippee. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you. I got to run. Thank you so much for the time.
I got to shut my door here.
Thank you, Michelle.
Senator White, I just wanted to mention, and I think you know this, but some of the other members may not, is that term that's used there in section 3 and S25 that's the term that's used because it's used throughout Act 164 in a variety of places. And when that bill first passed Senate Judiciary in February of 2019, that was the agreed upon, term that people were offering around the issue. I realize that has changed and now people hate that phrase, and are looking to kind of change that. But in terms of being consistent right now, until there is a new, either the board either fleshing that out and identifying what that means through rule or you directing it some other way, we want to be consistent so that it doesn't create confusion around these different groups. So,
well, the challenge is to do it so that you're not discriminating. That's I think also the fine line we tread here is that you can't discriminate.
It's a difficult issue, which is, I think, why
it
chose for the board to be taking it up in the context of all the moving pieces.
And I think the advisory board working out the criteria is good, and they can battle that piece out.
And my guess is that many of the people on the advisory board or who have been having thoughts about this have some thoughts already in mind, and so they can kind of figure that out. And clearly, the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance came up with some definitions here. I'm not sure I like those definitions, but if that's what everybody comes up with, then I'm not going to start second guessing, but we'll ask the advisory board committee, I think it's called the advisory committee, to grapple with that. And they there are representatives on that, as Keisha said, people who have different perspectives, and my guess is that they'll bring in a lot of the perspectives from the communities that they represent to that discussion. All right. So I would say in A, just instead of saying, I think Mark is right, instead of saying shall consider reduced licensing fees, and I think Senator Sears was pretty clear about that too. He wants them to come in with a recommendation of how to reduce or eliminate fees, licensing fees. And then you're rewriting B, right? So committee, can we jump to the license structure? And Graham, are you still with us? You are.
I am.
Can you just talk a little bit, give us some, you had some, I thought, really good suggestions this morning on the license, how to word the licensing structure, because there are many issues here. There's the development of a craft license. I've suggested a CSA type license so that farmers could actually sell just to their own group of people, just like CSAs do. A different license for that. There's production caps. So you had some really good language, I thought, this morning about how to direct them without coming up with specifics, because we can't do that, but how to set the parameters that they need to look at here. And this is not in S25 at all anywhere right now. This would be an addition. Michelle?
I just, because the members of your committee weren't privy to our conversation this morning, that in Act 164, it directs the board to report back to the General Assembly recommendations as to whether the General Assembly should add additional types of cannabis licenses, including a craft cooperative license, delivery license, or special event license, or others. And so there is already a requirement for them to report back on whether or not there should be additional licenses. So I think what you're talking about is amending that and potentially expanding that.
Yeah, I think
why not just let them do their work? And
because because we want to have them look at some very specific issues around the creation of those licenses. And I think that's what Graham has. It's not, okay, Graham, why don't you just talk to us a little bit about your suggestions about kind of putting some definition around what they should be looking at.
Thank you, Senator. And I can just quickly, let me just frame at least some of what we're suggesting here too, so this maybe makes a little sense to folks. I was asking the other question, but from the beginning, we've been asking for time in the ag committees because we feel like this isn't really a conversation for a 3-member CCB. This is more a conversation for a group of people who have expertise in the subject matter and who can bring in stakeholders from across, the farming community, the cultivator community, growing community, to have a conversation about this and to create some scale appropriate and agriculturally appropriate regulations. So we have worked with Vermont Grower System and Vermont Racial Justice Alliance and NOFA Vermont to come up with, and Trace as part of our coalition, to come up with some broad licensing ideas related to equity. So it essentially differentiates licenses based on scale, which is sort of gets to the craft consideration, which was the CCB was already directed to do. But also we ask that they define and differentiate based on outdoor production, mixed light, and indoor cultivation, because there's a significant difference that cultivators will tell you about in terms of what you can produce. For example, in 1 year in a temperate climate outdoors versus what you can produce in a controlled environment indoors in Vermont. This is Juniper. She's trying to eat a little right now. We have some grandparents here giving a hand. So we wanted to make sure that the CCB, if we're going to direct it to the CCB, my recommendation would be to put in enough detail such that they're not just required to consider this, but that they shall actually implement and shall make distinctions as we sort of suggest them based on scale, based on indoor, outdoor, mixed light cultivation, and we do have some specific ideas related to the craft license tiers as well. So what I suggested earlier today, and again, I do hope this goes to the Agriculture Committee so we really can have some conversation about this, because we also talk about production caps and supply management. And as I said earlier today, folks who understand how cannabis and other agricultural commodities what happens when they become commodified is they become priced based on economy of scale. The basic price point becomes unbearable for small producers, and that's why we have the situation we have in dairy production right now, where you have the huge farms, and we've lost thousands of dairy farms because there's an amazing amount of consolidation and concentration in that industry, and we've seen it in other states when the cannabis industry becomes commodified as well. So what we're trying to do is make an industry where as many people as possible can participate, and where people can actually make a decent livelihood by participating at a relatively small scale. So what I was suggesting is, for example, directing the CCB to define and differentiate licenses based on parameters related to indoor, outdoor, and mixed light cultivation, indoor scale of production, and to require them to institute production caps for all scales and types of operations. From our perspective, again, we have specific details that we suggested around fees, around scales, around definitions, but we are also, recognizing the challenges of this. I think that putting directives to the CCB, which require them to implement definitions and these specific distinctions, is something we'd be interested in looking at with you and seeing how close it would come to getting where we feel our community has asked us to get. Senator White, is that a decent summary? Do you want me to include anything else specific? I didn't get into too many of the details we really say because I don't think that's what you were interested in, but I can give some examples of what we would talk about in the Agriculture Committee.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure it will get to the Ag Committee, but you have 2 members of the Ag Committee here. So I would say that the distinctions, the licenses based on distinctions between scale, lighting, indoor, outdoor, and production caps for all of those. And I don't know if there are other parameters. I'm not sure that we can get into any more detail than that, but to tell them that they need to, when they're looking at developing licenses, they need to look at all of those things. Isn't that the way it makes sense, or am I not reading this right?
I mean, I think from our perspective, sort of similar to how Mark was saying last, the CCB shall consider. I don't think we're really. We would definitely continue to push at the legislative level for more specifics in legislation if the CCB were just considering. We want them to be mandated to make these differentiate by these scales. Yeah. This is sort of what equity, from our perspective. That's more what I was saying. And one of the things we know we can't deal with is part of what we're advocating for is that outdoor production of cannabis be considered agricultural. And that's a conversation we think would be really great to have in the ag committees.
Yeah.
We think there really are more scale appropriate ways of approaching this than across the board, taking all farmland in current use and taking all farmland and agricultural easements off the board, essentially taking some of your most experienced growers in the state who've been working for decades to try to affordably farm out of an industry where they might actually be able to make a decent livelihood or have a supplemental crop to make a decent livelihood.
No, I think I'll ask other committee members if they have any question. I think that you're right about leaving the question about the outdoor, whether it should be an agricultural crop or not, to the ag committee, because I don't think we can weigh in on that. But I did, when I was thinking about this, I wasn't thinking about that they should consider granting, differentiating the licenses in these categories, but that they need to differentiate the licenses based on those criteria. Michelle?
So I had a question because the current law requires the board to establish tiers within the license categories.
Mhm.
So right now it's required for them to establish a bunch of tiers for cultivators and for retailers, and then they have discretion to do it for all the other types of licenses. So I'm not clear on when adding something and saying that they have to consider and then report back to the General Assembly on licenses on the scale aspect, like as to scale. I don't understand how that's different from the tiering that's in there now. So I just need a little more explanation of what's does that bring, so I can just clarify that, because
Okay.
Could you clarify what you mean by tiers? Is that based on, you're talking about size?
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember, Anthony, but the predecessors to S54 that y'all worked on for a few years there, we had in there that you had established various tiers within each license category. So you might say, tier 1 is 1,000 square feet or less from a canopy standpoint. And then the next tier is this size, the next tier is that size. So, and I'm obviously not an expert in the growing aspect.
Sure.
So for me, thinking about it, I think of when you're talking about the tiers, you're talking about the scale of the operation. And so you're talking about how much space you're using for that operation to be cultivating. So when you're asking to put new language in there about having them identify licenses and things like that for related to scale, I'm just not clear on how that's different from what they're required to do now, which is to tier based on size.
Well, one thing might be, tiering by size says I can grow on X amount of acres, let's say. Whereas a supply management program, that the kind of thing that Graham was referring to, would say you can only grow as much, so many pounds per year.
Right, I got that
like
on production caps. I understand the production cap business, but I didn't understand what scale means separate and apart from the production caps.
Good question.
So
Yeah.
Graham or Jeffrey?
Why don't I start and then I can hand it over to Jeffrey, but just a reminder that the idea wasn't to just suggest language around tiers. We have actually specific suggestions around scale and size, and because we can't get the details considered legislatively, we're trying to work with something which gives language like this. So sorry, I'm just getting some help here and it's pretty distracting. Currently, Senator Flynn, what we're suggesting is, yes, tiers based on size, and tiers could be interpreted however, I think, based on the current language. in the legislation, right? They could tier it based on anything. We've suggested tiers based on size, differentiated by outdoor, mixed light, and indoor, because they both have substantial different potentials for growth over periods of time. And we've also suggested not production caps in our case based on amount of product, but actually based on acreage for outdoor and square feet of indoor space, or square feet for both. We just converted it to acreage. And I'll pass it on to Jeffrey just because I'm being sort of distracted and I can come back and just listen and see if I can help.
Thanks.
So one thing that, and I have Act 164 in front of me, and thank you for highlighting that, Michelle. It is on page 42, if anyone has that in front of them as well. We expand on that. So for instance, there is no distinction between indoor and outdoor, which is crucial, which will be developed, if not now, then by the CCB. And why do we bring that up? We see differences in grow ratios by different states. So for instance, I believe Oregon is 1:5 outdoor. We adopted a 1:4 ratio, which is what we see in Northern California, which means for every 1,000 square feet inside, you get 4,000 square feet outside. That seems to be an adequate ratio for outdoor and indoor cultivation in terms of meeting production. And I want to be mindful here, stepping back for a moment, we're not, we're pro legalization, but we really want regulation. So that's what we're talking about here. We want to define as much of this regulation for Vermonters as possible. One thing we see in other states is them, and you guys aren't alone, grappling with what's legislative and what is in the territory of rulemaking. And what we've seen a lot of states come to realize after having a mature market is they develop licensing at the legislative level. So that's one reason why we are suggesting this, and we've approached it this way. We're also mindful of the formation issues that we have right now with this law. It's significantly behind. We think that it could catch up still, but we don't want to see these significant delays manifest or materialize with licensing at a later date. The CCB has a lot on its plate right now. So, and I think that we all have expressed those concerns. So we're trying to, and I understand that it's sort of late in the process, but we are trying to assist as much as possible by trying to define as much as possible. And I understand shifting to suggestions as opposed to having the time to define these through process. I understand that. So hopefully I spoke to some of the parameters with regards to differentiating between indoor and outdoor. And I'm happy to take any questions that you guys may have.
Any questions here? I'm not sure where to go with this. I thought that we were. Yes, Senator Clarkson.
I guess I'm just feeling like I feel like, and I know I'm not an expert on this, but I do feel like the cart is really before the horse. Why can't we just let the CCB get started and then have all these people with these great ideas testify in front of them while they're creating these rules, instead of our trying to micromanage the CCB? And we've given them the tiers to get going with, and then all these groups will be testifying in front of the CCB board. Why are we doing their work? Strikes me, this is their work. This is what they need to do.
I think that the suggestion was to just put a few more parameters around what they're doing. That if we haven't clearly defined tiers, and if we haven't made any distinction between indoor and outdoor and mixed lighting, I don't know. I just
but can't that be a conversation with them directly when they're weighing this?
Yeah, I think that the thought was to tell them that they had to consider this when they're doing it. These are the things that they need to look at when they're considering this. Senator Polina, and then
well,
Senator
I agree with what you're saying. I think what we're talking about doing is telling them that as they develop their criteria for licenses, they shall include, the tiers and indoor, outdoor, like they shall actually include these things. So that still means they would have to go out and hold hearings and take testimony and decide exactly how to do it, but we're telling them what they should include. We're not recommending, we're saying you shall do these things.
Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the CCB have rulemaking authority?
That's what
Yeah.
they're going to be spending their first year.
Yes.
Okay,
And,
so
that's what's going to be taking, and if I can just say, as part of that is the indoor outdoor mixed lighting production caps. That's all like in everybody's rules. Like that's just part of what you do if you're the CCB and you're establishing the tiers and the licenses. That's all going to be part of their discussion. I mean, you can certainly tell them to look at those things, but they're going to look at those things anyway.
So I guess my suggestion would be that we send an MOU or some sort of a letter once they have been appointed and ask them to please concentrate on the areas that both Graham and Jeffrey have suggested as being important. In other words, I don't know that we need to get involved on a statutory level. I think they could do it with rulemaking, and it's a little bit more nimble than a statute. It's not 100% more nimble, but that way, if they err one way or another, their ability to redo it seems to me a little bit easier than just having to do a whole new bill. But that's just one idea.
So
Well,
when
I
they
guess
go, oh, sorry.
Go
Sorry.
ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say, so when they go through rulemaking, you guys probably know rulemaking even better than I do. You probably deal with that pretty regularly in this committee. So, there's a long process. They'll issue draft rules, they'll take comments, they have to respond to comments, they'll have some hearings, maybe they'll have some hearings around the state. They'll go through all of that. And that's originally why, when you set up 164, was to allow that level of kind of minutia detail around, what kind of security measures are appropriate for an outdoor grow that's only 1,000 square feet. Does it need to be the same as what it is for an indoor, $10,000 square, like all of that kind of stuff was for the board to be working through the rulemaking process and hearing from people who want to be a part of the industry and getting their recommendations for it.
So I'm hearing from some people that we need to set a little more guidance for them in telling them what they have to look at, and from others that we don't need to. So where are we? And I see it's Graham's little yellow hand.
Thanks, folks. Just in relation to that conversation, one of the reasons we did this was because we saw a lot of these details spelled out for the medical industry and integrated licenses. We also saw details which articulated what the smallest scale of craft license would be, and we weren't satisfied with that. We really didn't feel like it was appropriate or equitable to define it for the already most established and most heavily moneyed part of the industry, but to sort of leave the rest of us hanging out to dry and be like, well, just wait for the CCB. They'll articulate, you have a rulemaking process. It's not the Agency of Agriculture. If the Agency of Agriculture were doing a rulemaking process, we'd have a bunch of people with expertise in the agricultural field too. It would make more sense from us to be able to speak to the agricultural committees, have a conversation about this, make some more clear directives so the CCB can make some decisions on. But right now we have very little for our constituents defined, and there's a lot defined for the dispensary side of the industry. So that's part of our concern here, is that we felt like we need to reach out and define some stuff, because otherwise we're going to be left out to dry like we were in Act 164. And maybe Jeffrey has some more comments.
Okay, let me just jump in and ask Graham a question if I could.
Yep.
If we were able to get you to come into Senate Ag, and obviously you get two of the members here, are you suggesting, Graham, that then we would take further testimony and then Ag would somehow get that information to the Senate Judiciary on S25 to be added?
I'm not suggesting a particular process point. I'm suggesting that the Agriculture Committee is the appropriate place for this testimony to be taken, for these changes to be made. And we're appreciative that Senator White and Sears have been making the time to try to figure out with us how to most appropriately do it. I think it's more in your realm of expertise to figure out like how to do that from a process perspective would be. But I'm open to supporting that and doing what we can. You know, we've been reaching out for 2 years now, trying to get the Ag Committees to hear this. So that's where we're at with that.
Just, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if we, if this bill, you know, is then now going to the House. I mean, the House Agriculture Committee could take the time to explore this and add this work also. Would that make any sense to? I mean, you know, this, we don't have to have this bill in perfect form.
Right.
I mean, it's going to the House. The House will spend a lot of time on it, as Michelle already noted.
I think that Senate Government Operations spent a lot of time on it. I think Senate Ag or House Ag spent time on it.
Well, we could ask them to. I mean, on this piece anyway. I'm all for adding something, but I also just feel like we've given CCB the tools and hopefully they're up and running in the next month, and it just anyway.
All right, well, let's see if we can convince Ag to take it up. What's your schedule like tomorrow?
I happen to have our agenda right here. Tomorrow, we're going to look at Act or S61, agricultural land use value appraisals. And I think that's the only thing on the calendar right now. So it might, yeah, I don't see anything else tomorrow. There's a lot of TBDs later in the week.
So perhaps the two Ag members on this committee could convince the chair to take, and the vice chair, who's very interested in this, to take this up tomorrow and look at it. And if they can come up with some language, and if not, we could look at it again on Thursday.
Well, that might be a little bit ambitious in terms of taking up tomorrow. But I'd certainly be willing to.
Or Thursday morning.
Yeah, that probably would be a little bit easier to accomplish. Senator Polina, what do you think?
I think you're right. I think, you know, tomorrow is a possibility, but Thursday is more likely.
Okay.
Do you want to contact Senator Starr? Do you want me to?
Well, I think we should do it together. I mean,
okay.
So, I mean, I'd be willing to write to him and CC you or say that you and I have been involved in these conversations.
Okay. Yeah. Mention that Graham wants to come in, and Jeffrey for that matter, if he wants to. And
I think that you have Senator Pearson was very he was the one that actually got the current use language that's in 164 in there.
That's right. I remember that. Yep.
I mean, he's the one that brought it up. So who's your
so
fifth member?
Corey Parent.
Corey Parent. So just to finish this thought, because I could write him an email soon, but what are we actually saying? We're saying that in GovOps, we've heard testimony regarding the impacts on agriculture that we think need to be worked out before the Agriculture Committee to have input into the bill. I mean, just generally like that.
I would think so. Yep.
Okay.
So you're looking at all of the agriculture issues that the topics that have been raised by the witnesses?
Yeah. Are you asking?
Yeah,
or
I'm asking because I'm wondering if I'm gonna have to staff it or not, or if I pull in.
That's what I was just wondering too, is whether you were available.
When?
Well, either tomorrow or Thursday.
It depends. I'm in a lot, you know, with crossover. I'm pretty booked.
Sure.
Depends on when. But if, you know, a lot of this stuff on the ag stuff really isn't appropriate for me anyway. I mean, I know certainly, obviously all the cannabis stuff and 164 in and out, but if it's going to go into deep into ag policy and stuff like that. That's not really me.
Okay.
So that would be Michael.
Right.
Right.
I can talk to him. That's why I was just trying to understand the scope of it, because the witnesses have presented like a real kind of wholesale overhaul of a lot of the ag stuff. And if it's going to be that, it should be Michael, because
Right.
he's the one who talks about, he's the one who handles land use. He's the one who handles current use. He's the one who handles all of that kind of stuff. It's not me.
Right.
Actually, Anthony,
Okay.
I just looked at our agenda, and tomorrow might make more sense because we literally don't have anything else after the S61 consideration tomorrow. We do have something else on Thursday. We have maple syrup at 10:30. Friday, well, Friday's probably too late. Tomorrow, if we could get folks in around 10:30 in the morning, it might work.
Graham, are you around tomorrow at 10:30ish?
I should be coming out of the House Agriculture Committee at that time. I'm in House Ag at 9, so I'll probably be, yeah, you see them.
Hi.
She's just learning to wave. Zoom is such an interesting interactive platform compared to any other screen. But she doesn't see screens really otherwise. Yeah, I can do my best to be available, and I really do appreciate the effort you all are willing to put in here. I think it would be really helpful and appreciated, and I would certainly make a time. I don't know if Jeffrey's available. Jeffrey, what do you think?
10:30 tomorrow?
Well, as a guess, yeah.
Sure.
How about Michelle?
Michelle's not sure.
I can also reach out to Maddie Kempner, who's been working with us from the Northeast Organic Farmers Association on this as well, and see if she's available there.
Okay.
So Graham, how would you describe to Senate Ag Committee what it is you want to talk about?
I mean, I'm happy to send you, I think I actually did this weekend already send everybody on that committee copies of sort of some of our proposed language, summary findings, and some bullets. And I think you all framed it pretty well, though, just talking about some agricultural aspects of this legislation, which are most appropriate for the Agricultural Committee to look at, and which, Senate Judiciary and Senate Government Ops have felt are outside of their purview.
You got Graham's email, Anthony, Saturday at.
Yep, I see it.
Okay. So maybe you could cut or copy and paste some of the sentences in there. I don't know whether the chair will allow it or not, but I think if 3 out of the 4 or 3 out of the 5 committee members want to, I don't see any reason why we could.
So Senator Sears is also, I believe, sending your committee a request to take it up, and maybe I'll do the same thing from our committee.
Okay.
Okay.
So there's one other, Michelle, there's one other issue on here that we were supposed to look at, is on page 5 of S25. And that's the integrated license. So do you want to explain that to us? It's section 2.
Starting on line 10.
You're muted.
I'm on to one device now. So section 2, integrated license. Remember, the integrated license is only available to the existing dispensaries as long as they're in compliance with their license and they meet the requirements under Act 164. They would be granted an integrated license, which would allow them to stay vertically integrated under one license and so the way that they work now under the cannabis medical program is just under one license rather than having separate licenses for each of the different types of things they engage in, so that they could enter the adult use cannabis market with an integrated license. The current language basically says as long as they qualify and they meet all the conditions, that they shall be issued the license. There's a tweak to line 21, and I realize it probably just escaped editing. Right now, the current law says there shall be no more than 5 total integrated licenses. That's current law. And I don't know where that not came from. I don't know if one of the editors put it in there or something, but that doesn't change anything substantively. The only change is on page 5 on lines 2 and 3, where it changes the shall to a may, so that it would allow the board the discretion about whether or not to issue an integrated license. So even if the applicant met all the criteria, the board could just say, no, we're not going to issue any integrated, or we're only going to issue 2 integrated. Whereas the current law right now says basically if they qualify, then they should be issued the license. The thing that's important to note about if you go from the shall to the may, and then it kind of, it does have repercussions in terms of the other licenses and also for your funding mechanism. Reason why, so the way that the implementation is set up is that the first people to get licenses next spring are the small cultivators, testing labs, and the integrated licensees. The reasoning behind that is if you look at the other states that have gone from a medical to an adult use program, they've all kind of let the existing medical dispensaries roll out first because they're already up and running. And that's a way to get some revenue coming in to support the system that you're going to roll out. And so the idea in 164 is that the small cultivators could start growing, and the integrated could be growing and start selling immediately to the public. And then the small cultivators, once under that new license, can sell to both dispensaries and integrated licensees. And so you could get the small cultivators into the market and making a profit under the new license, rather than waiting until the retailers are online, which would be at the earliest October. So if you wind up not having the integrated go early, it also kind of, there's no market for the small cultivators. There's nowhere for them. There's nobody for them to sell to. So I just want to note that. There's also means that you don't have any tax revenue coming in until October of FY23 rather than April of FY22. So just know that that's going to affect your pocketbook there in terms of the revenue coming in. And not that it's necessarily going to be, I don't know, I know there's a big, everybody kind of flocks to it right at the beginning, but why I mentioned the revenue is not so much for the general fund purposes or substance abuse fund, but you're running at a deficit for the board for the first year, absolutely, probably the second year, maybe the third year, because the board is only supported through fees, through licensing fees, things like that. The tax money, doesn't go in to support the running of the program. And there's a provision in Act 164 that if there is still a hole in the fund that supports the board's work, that the tax revenue is supposed to go and fill that so that you're not running at this big deficit for years and years. So if you shorten it, it just means you're going to have less revenue to be able to fund. You're going to have to come up with money to appropriate to the board to run the program rather than using tax dollars from the early sales to backfill the deficit. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So committee, the question this morning was, and it got put off to us about whether we should leave shall or may. And one of my concerns with putting may in there is that there's no criteria for why they would deny it. I mean, they could just decide that they don't like the guy that comes in and deny the license. So where our committee do you know enough about this now that you think you could weigh in? Virginia, do you want to just, where are you?
Well, the dispensaries, would like to, have the shell remain. The dispensaries, want to partner with the state. They want to see this get up and running as soon as possible. And, having the small growers be licensed to start to sell their products, which would then, I know it was mentioned earlier this morning about, some growers probably wouldn't want to sell to the dispensaries because it would be the dispensaries product. But what the dispensaries have said right along is that, if Farmer Virginia is selling a product to us, it's going to go on the shelf as Farmer Virginia. It's not going to be under the dispensary. It'll be sold in that integrated license. But, and so I think really it's, how soon do you want to start getting, income coming into the state? And again, the dispensaries have that ability to, they have an integrated license now, they do everything. And as I said this morning, they don't want to be a monopoly. They want to work with the state and, recognizing that, there's going to be a lot of other people coming into the program. And this will just get some small farmers going, get the integrated license going, and having money come in to fund everything.
I see Graham has his hand up.
Thank you. I just had a question, actually. If, one of the things we've been trying to achieve, and this is sort of similar to what you were talking about this morning, Senator White, if there were, for example, a CSA model or a direct sale model where a farmer was allowed to sell the product they produce on their own farm from the farm or to customers through a CSA, would that be considered an integrated license? Would they need to have a license that they'd be doing retail, potentially processing and cultivation and just selling it directly? And I guess I want to be, when there's a limitation on integrated licenses, would that be considered an integrated license if it contained all three of those, or would it have to be called an integrated license for it to be considered an integrated license?
My guess is that would be a CSA license, that it wouldn't be an integrated license.
Okay, so like in our proposal, we call like a small farm license where anybody who's at a certain scale of production could sell their own product from their site with a particular type of license which enabled on-farm processing and retail of on-farm products.
If that's one of the licenses that's developed, yeah, that's the way I would see it. I think the integrated licenses, there can't be more than 5 of them because there are right now 5 dispensaries. So there wouldn't be more than that.
Correct. I just wanted to make, if those if someone were at some point given the allowance to do multiple functions, would that, for example, act by the CCB be preempted by a law which said, well, there's only 5 integrated licenses allowed, and this is functionally an integrated license, right? Like they can retail and cultivate and process.
I don't know, Michelle, what do you think? I see that.
No, the way that it's set up now is that if you want to be, if you want to do that, you would get a small or whatever size tier cultivation. You would get a, micro processing, and then you get, although there's not a processing, it's more like there's the wholesaler. I don't know that you could probably just have a cultivation and a retail and have the smallest tier of license for the cultivation and the retail license. And then you would engage and do what you want to do, which is direct selling to consumer from the farm. So potentially they may come up with one license that does that and has some things like that, but you can still do that under the current system. You would just have 2 licenses. You'd have you'd have a mini, small cultivation license, and you'd have a small tier retail license.
I think we understand that, and that's part of what we see as potentially problematic. Is like, what is the cost of all these licenses for someone who, for example, is a small farmer that can't compete in a wholesale price world? They can compete by directly selling their product. Are they going to have to pay the same amount of fee to set up a retail license and a processing license, as opposed to having a more accessible integrated license?
I think that we aren't establishing fees. And I think that when the board considers this, they're going to consider that if they have different tiers and different for the fees are going to be different for different tiers, you're not going to have the same fee. And then it might end up being that there is a CSA license. You only have to have one. They may do that. I don't know. I don't think that we can get into that level of detail here. Does that help? So committee?
Yeah, I was just wanting that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't that the language around limiting the number of integrated licenses wasn't limiting the functional integration of licenses in even like a CSA or a small farm license, like you're suggesting. And it sounds like the interpretation currently is no.
Yeah, that's my interpretation. And I'll argue with the board if they don't like that interpretation. Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So are we only to decide whether it should be shall or may? And if so, what's the negative side of making it shall?
It is shall right now.
That's what I mean.
I don't know
that-
why, I don't know
all-
why it was put in here as a may. I see that I'm one of the sponsors of this bill. I don't know why it was put in there as may instead of shall. I mean, personally, I think it should be shall.
Makes sense to
So-
me.
It was in response to, and I don't know specifically what the concern was, but it's something from the governor with regard to the integrated or the dispensaries being able to get integrated licenses. So.
But they already have them now.
No, dispensaries are under the medical program and they're integrated under their medical license. If they want to enter the adult use, they would have to get an integrated under the new adult use program. So those would be separate. And I think it just goes to the issue of what some of the witnesses are saying, that they feel as though the dispensaries have an unfair advantage. And so this was just, I think, somewhat of a placeholder maybe for senators to at least have the conversation around the issue of integrated licenses to dispensaries.
And did Senate Judiciary just not want to take it up, or why is it?
Because we were as unfocused there as we are here. And it just got, I don't know how else to say it. This dealing with this bill in two different committees and it not really having a home anywhere is, I mean, it really should be 3 different committees and it'll end up being 5 committees if Ag takes it up. So I think that's why. And that's my best guess. So Jeffrey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to the consolidation that occurred over the past year. So between S54 being introduced and then it passing into law or enacting in, I guess, October of last year, just want to remind everyone that, of the large businesses that operate in the state, these are multi-state operators. MSOs is what they're called in the industry. One of our dispensaries, I believe Champlain Valley Dispensary, is the only locally independently owned, but the rest are owned by large out-of-state companies. And there was consolidation over the past year, over the course of you guys deliberating the bill last year. Curaleaf purchased Grassroots Inc. These are two large players. I just wanted you guys to be aware of that. Curaleaf is based out of Massachusetts, and Grassroots Inc. is based out of Illinois. They are both license holders in this state. Historically, they own, I believe, I guess, two different or maybe even three different medical dispensary licenses. I don't know how their consolidation factors into the issuing of these integrated licenses come next year. I at least want you guys to be aware of that industry activity.
Keisha?
So it's almost 5 o'clock and I'm just wondering, I feel like from my past experience, if we were in the building, we would ask someone on our committee to like have lunch with someone on ag and some of these advocates and sort of help us solve this in a way that really honors their expertise. I'm just wondering if we could spend a few minutes maybe now on like what even makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, we
Good
can,
point.
but this issue is not an ag issue.
What
This is a licensing issue.
Yeah.
This is whether the integrated, whether they have to give them, if they qualify,
Yeah.
can the Cannabis Control Board just say, no, we're not going to give it to you?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question here. This isn't an ag issue.
Well, it's called the Cannabis Control Board. I mean, aren't they controlling? Isn't this exactly what they're doing?
So the question is, do we give them, here's the way I look at this. We had that if they qualify, if someone qualifies, one of these 5 entities, there can only be 5. If one of them qualifies and applies for it, in our original legislation, we said, if they qualify, they meet all the requirements, you give them the license. What this says now is, even if they qualify and they are one of those 5, you have the right to just tell them you don't want to give them the license. That's what this may and shall is.
And these 5 are independent from the 5 medical dispensaries.
No, they are the 5. They are the 5 dispensaries. If you read, it says that an integrated license is only available to an applicant and its affiliates that hold a dispensary registration on April 2022. So it's only the dispensaries, and there are only 5 of them, and that's why there are 5.
And just so I can be clear, is that so with their integrated license, that allows them to engage in all of the activities, but they can only have one location, one point of serving the public. So there will be, let's say if all 5 licensees wanted, dispensary licensees wanted to get an integrated, the maximum number of retail shops that would be owned and run by just, the entities that also own dispensaries would be 5. So it doesn't allow multiple points. I just wanted to.
It isn't.
So they can't be like McDonald's and have
right.
like license and then franchise out through the state.
Right. So
as opposed to the
5,
towns, which are the franchise at the moment.
No.
There could be 241 shops.
No, we're talking about 5 retail establishments, a maximum of 5 here with this. Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I can appreciate, Michelle, what you said about sort of giving the dispensaries a little bit of an advantage over other people. But that advantage, as I think you put the timeline out, will only last for about a year until fiscal year 23, correct? When everybody else.
Even last a year. It's just from April of next year until October when retailers. So May.
Okay.
Yeah. 5 months.
So six months.
Okay, then I want to make it shall.
Okay. Senator Ram.
I didn't have my hand up, but Graham does.
I know, but it's almost 5 o'clock. We have
okay. Is it may or shall? Is it may or shall?
Yeah.
I'd like to listen to other people in the committee because I'm just feeling like I don't know. I don't trying to absorb last year's.
Okay, I'll weigh in. I think it should be shall, because I don't think that they should have the discretion to just not give it to someone just because they don't feel like it. If
And
they qualify.
I'll add my 2 cents that the small farmers would have an advantage in the interim by being able to find a new market for their product. So that helps them. And whatever disadvantage it puts the average retail licensee at, it's not going to be forever. It's going to be for 5 months. And I don't see that as particularly onerous on them. So I'm fine with shall.
But is it okay? I'm just confused. Is it shall? Because I mean, is shall saying that it's first come first serve?
No, shall says that there can be 5 of them. There can be 5, and if whoever comes applies for it and they qualify, they meet all the requirements, they shall be given a license. They can have 5. There can be 5 licenses, and there are only 5 people that qualify for the 5 licenses. So it isn't as if anybody's being cut out. There can be 5 licenses, and there are 5 dispensaries now. So each of them, if they qualify, could have one. That would mean 5 retail establishments in 250 towns.
And then Keisha, in October,
Yeah.
when it completely opens up for any retail licenses.
Mm-hmm.
It's tiered because our experience in getting testimony from the other states was to not open all the licensing categories at once, because you got to first start with cultivators and testing, and then you kind of roll that out. And if you start trying to do everybody at once, you get overwhelmed. And so, or you have retailers that have no product, things like that. And so,
so it's saying they have to get their ducks in a row and come with their application.
Yeah.
And it's guaranteed if they do that and everything's in order.
yes.
And everything's in order.
And there's no one else that we're leaving out in the interim by doing that.
No, because there are only 5 of them, and you can grant 5 licenses.
Okay. I guess I just got lost in what the controversy is, but
The controversy is that some people didn't want, they think that giving the dispensaries a leg up is going to disadvantage everybody else. And I think there was also some fear that they would put retail establishments in many different towns, which they can't do. They can only do the one retail establishment. So, okay, I'm going to, I see that both of you have your hands up here, but I need to get the committee to agree on something here, and then we'll, or not, if we can't agree today, we'll take this up again on Thursday, but anyway, or you can keep doing this
Anthony
if you
and I
want.
just, Anthony and I just need to weigh in, and we need to go soon.
Yeah,
So I'm happy to stay with the shall, and if they work something out and change it in the house, that's fine. But I think for the moment I'm a shall.
I would go with shall, and I would also mention that pretty soon I'm gonna have to feed my turtle.
yes, I think that you are right. The turtle needs to be fed. So we will look at this language again, assuming that we will have some language. And I will bring the thoughts to judiciary in the morning, and